Welcome to the Conscious Creators Community Show, episode 8. Today we're talking about boundaries. What are boundaries? Why are they important? And how will they help you become more free? So our co-created community, the Conscious Creators Community, has one goal: to empower and facilitate positive transformation. We aim to do this on a personal, collective, and global level. And for all the people watching in the group, we are here to answer your questions, to listen to your suggestions, and to empower you to be the best version of yourself. So please feel free to ask anything you want, and somebody in the group will get back to you. So enough from me. I'm your host, Matt Love, and you can find me at mattlove.business. I'm going to let everybody introduce themselves. And as we always do, I'm going to ask one question as I do that. And this week, the question is, please give one example of a boundary that you've set in your life and how it benefited you. And Sil, you're first on my screen today.
Brilliant. I've got an unusual boundary. When I was a kid, I set the boundary. I'm sorry, still Sebastian from Wave Impeccability. Just hashtag Wave Impeccability. You'll find out all about it. But when I was a kid, I set the boundary, no hugs, because my mothers and my sister, well, one in particular, were very inappropriate with their hugging. And I said, after a while, no, I stopped it. I said, no more. And this really freaked them out big time. But they didn't have any boundaries. They didn't know where to hold that boundary. And if I hadn't done that, who knows where they would have gone with that. So, yeah, it's an unusual boundary, but one that was very significant, very important that I had to set.
I like that. I think it's a really good example of a boundary that somebody could set, for sure. Absolutely. And so, Don?
All right.
Okay.
There was a time a while ago, about 4 or 5 years or something. There was a need to get clear about where I stood and where another stood. I can't name them particularly, but we were having this relationship for a long time, and it was I was trying to please the other person a lot, and it only came later to me that I realized this person was not that interested in me growing as a person, but having me come along and being able to serve them. And that was after so many years, it's quite distressing. And it was time then to really get clear and then put up the boundary to make sure that that person knew they couldn't do that to me again.
Brilliant. I love that example. Yeah, really, really good. And John, you're next on my screen.
Okay, thanks. Thank you, Matt, and hello, everybody. I'm John Cooper, and I have a program that helps people kind of release their inner strengths and have more fun in life. But one boundary that I set years ago, I was working actually in a corporation, believe it or not, and they offered me the position of being the director of communication. Have more fun. Can you hear me?
Yes, can. Yeah,
okay.
Sorry.
Yeah, so they offered me an executive position after I'd just been an intern for about 2 months, and I said, okay, I'll do that, but I'm not going to do this thing of buttoning up my sleeves and always wearing a tie and all of this stuff. So I said, my boundary is, I'm going to be comfortable. And I'm sorry if you don't like it. And they say, but our president, he will hate this. I said, I don't care. Let's try it. So for the next 6 weeks or so, I was like this, very informal comparatively for an executive. And it turned out that the president loved it, that he was really tired of everybody towing the line and fitting this model. So it actually worked out very well for me. So sometimes setting unwelcome boundaries actually works to your benefit anyway. So I've used that for the rest of my life anyway. So
that's another brilliant example, and such varied examples today. I'm loving it. Jen, you're next.
Hi, I'm Jen. I'm a neuroscience-based educator, mentor, and founder of the Human Infusion Project, which is a resource for affordable, practical classes and presentations that help people amplify the work they're doing in between their therapeutic sessions. So boundaries, I think I'll go with the work one too, because both my husband and I are entrepreneurs. We did used to work for a corporate environment and more traditional work environment at one time. The biggest boundary that we set, probably started setting about 4 or 5 years ago, was on when we took calls and emails and when our work hours were. It sounds, I mean, because he was the manager of a company, they felt that he should be available 24/7, like he didn't have a family life or a personal life. And there were often times in the environment I worked that people expected me to be available or be able to work until the work was done. Well, sometimes you can do that, and sometimes you had to set a limit on your hours. So we do that now. We set the phone is off at 6 o'clock and no emails are answered after that, and not before 8 a.m. the next day. And we only work certain hours, both of us, and the benefit is monumental. I mean, we have our personal time in the evenings, we have time to exercise in the mornings, we have times to socialize with friends. And because we've created that arena, we come back to work so much more refreshed and, ready to go.
Yeah, and really crucial things. And I think so many people are going to relate to that one. The working one, being asked to go the extra mile, so to speak, is what we say. Anastasia, you're next.
Thanks, Matt. I'm Anastasia Tiki. I'm a transformation coach and I help people find their inner confidence. Now, a boundary that I've set after actually learning the hard way about this was following my intuition. It's something that I'm very strict with myself now, is that if somebody says, the sky's blue, and my intuition is saying the sky is white, the sky is white. I just don't veer from it now, because what happened in my earlier life was I wasn't following it because I was not taught to follow it. And a lot of us, come to this world and our intuition tells us all sorts of things. And then people around us are saying, no, that's not true. And we're not taught and we're not encouraged to follow our intuition. And what I have found is that it has got me into all sorts of trouble when I didn't. So now it's a very strict boundary that I have with myself to always follow my intuition, no matter what people are saying. And it has served me extremely well. It has, when I do trust it beyond what appears to be true and what others are saying, and just keep listening to it and following it, I find that it never fails me.
Brilliant. I like that one a lot too. I like the way you linked up the intuition there as well. And I think that's quite an important point we'll probably get to in a little while. Anthony, you're next.
Hey, my name is Anthony. I'm a holistic peak performance coach specialized in the neuroscience of flow states. So my boundary, the one I'd like to share that came up for me today, is really a point where I decided that's it, no more getting drunk, no more hangovers. And I mean, the experience that catalyzed that to happen is I was at a friend's wedding. I hadn't seen that friend in years, and we used to party together a few years ago. But so I kind of went along with it, and it was kind of this aspect of me that really wanted to please them and also get the group validation. But the next day I had work because this was the pre-wedding drinking, and I could not work. I was sick all day. I was throwing up, and I said, this is it. That's the limits. I am no longer gonna accept putting myself in situations like this. And since then, essentially the line is I'm not getting anywhere beyond tipsy. I'm not getting anywhere beyond 1 or 2 drinks in an hour, and that's only for rare occasions like a birthday, like a New Year's celebration, and that's it. And the benefits of that, once I had set it and more integrated it into my identity, then it became, this is so much easier to enforce now, because then I could say, it's my life rule. It's not you. It's just this rule that I have for myself, for my health, and I feel no more pressure at all. And it's just been really taken a load off my mind to have to, number one, not have to decide where I'm at, and number two, being able to enforce it, and have all the sort of health and productivity benefits that come with not drinking. So yeah, that's what I wanted to share today.
Thank you, Anthony. I think it's a really good example. Is a lot of people see boundaries as something where we're setting between other people or just with the rules for other people, but we actually have to set boundaries with ourselves sometimes, which involve other people. As you said, other people used to invite you out and everything, but it was a boundary you set with yourself. It wasn't say, I'm not going to go and see them anymore because they make me drink. It's like, no, I'm not going to drink anymore because that's what my body is asking me to do. Sander, you are next on my screen.
Hello, everybody. My name is Sander. I'm a body worker / embodiment coach, and I'm from the Netherlands. And my website is primefire.nl. Yeah, regarding boundaries, mine is also work related. I'm now self-employed. I used to work for a recruitment company where they send out specialists to do special IT jobs. And I ran into issues with my field manager, and she really didn't like me. So she tried to do everything to work against me. And I wrote a letter to the CEO of that company, like, hey, it was a small company, so I knew the CEO, like, hey, this is what's happening, and I do not agree with this. And he basically said, like, oh yeah, you have to deal with her about it, with my field manager. And I went to that conversation, and I only made clear to her my point of that I wasn't agreeing to how she put my evaluation on paper, because it wasn't what it was, and I kept to it. So I kept my boundary, like, I'm not agreeing with what you said. And she became really at first she was really trying to persuade me by being nice. Then she was trying to persuade me by getting really angry and insulting me. And then she was trying to persuade me by blackmailing me. And then she was trying to persuade me by playing the victim. And all that time I just stuck with, I don't care. I'm not agreeing to what is here on paper. And what that eventually made me do was take my resignation and start my own business. Because I really had something like, I do not want to deal with bullshit from other people and stuff from other people that are impacting me, but I have no influence over.
Yeah, I mean, it's a really good example of how far it can go.
Me to self-discovery, doing the training as a body worker, doing all the stuff that I do with myself now. So that one point of just drawing a line, like, hey, this is not what I'm going to do anymore. Fuck this. And stepping up for myself, that has a cascading effect on everything afterwards. So
yeah, and I think that's the point, is that how much they can benefit, how just setting these simple little things and actually
Yeah,
standing your ground.
Yeah,
Really, really
stick
important.
with what you feel and what you believe in. That's really
Sure.
important. Like, hey, this is a boundary that I'm not gonna cross. Even if though the other person doesn't have any boundaries, you stick to your boundary because
Yeah.
it's your boundary. It has nothing to do with the other person. Other people try to cross it, but hey, this is my boundary. Stop.
Yeah, I think it's a really good point. Brenda, have you got one to share with us?
Hi, yes. My name is Brenda Johnston. I'm an energy healer and a Reiki master teacher and shamanic practitioner. And I healed my shoulder with energy work. So I'm here to serve and help others at torontoshaman.com if anyone wants to find me. So my boundary, just one that's recent, is I'm putting my phone on airplane mode. I'm a people pleaser that always wants to be in control and help everybody. And somebody phones me and I'm like, oh, I got something starting in 5 minutes, and they'll take 4 minutes to tell me something silly. So I put it on airplane mode, and I'm not getting into that drama that everyone tries to pull me into. And I'm working on my own needs first, so it's helping me quite a bit. And even if I don't have it on airplane mode, I'm waiting for a call, I just look at it and say, nope, that's not my urgent. It might be their urgent, but it's not my urgent. So it's helping me quite a bit to stay focused on tasks. And I have a cousin who just got out of the hospital on Tuesday. I was making and taking phone calls all this morning, and then I didn't get my breakfast. And so I still need to work on it. But what I said is there was a support worker and my cousin, and I just said to both of you guys work it out. I'm going here. You work out what you need and what you're doing, and I'm not involved because, like I said, I'm a people pleaser. So it's ongoing, and I'm really glad that I'm doing it. It's something like what Jen had said about her husband and everything. So I'm not, they're putting the fishing rope thing out and trying to reel me in, and I'm being tested, but I'm still saying no.
Yeah, it takes time, I think. I mean, it's very similar to the one I'm going to share at the end. And yeah, I mean, it does, when people are used to you being one way and then you start putting in the boundaries, there is always that little push at the beginning. But I will share mine at the end, and then I won't go on. So Cher, you're next on my screen. Are you okay to share one with us?
Hi, I'm Cher, Unbound is what I like to go by. I am a trauma recovery facilitator, specialist, coach, but I prefer specialist or facilitator. I say, where can you find me? On Facebook, Instagram, everywhere, by Cher Unbound. My boundary, I gave this a lot of thought, especially after I saw the question. So I'll get to it really quick. I had to set a boundary against myself to benefit myself. And what that means to me was, it's not so much telling anybody else no. I had to learn how to tell me no. I had to tell myself no. Stop with the derogatory, the insensitive, the bullying of myself, comments to myself, shaming myself. I had to stop all of that. And that was setting that I had to learn how to set a big boundary not to do that. And what has come out of that, of course, is confidence and improved self-worth, raising the bar all the time as I go. Because, there's times when I still have to, I still fall back just a little bit. But one of the biggest things that came out of that for me is I gave myself permission to accept me, who I am, without shame. Just living without shame is so enormously freeing. You can forget all the rest of the self-esteem work once you drop that shame, at least to me. It was like that was the moment that I realized that I am becoming unbound, that I am living deliberately, that I am taking charge of my life, and I am capable of empowering myself every day. And I don't know, it's been a wonderful thing. So I really, really cannot thank you enough for having me think about that question.
Pleasure.
Not something I think about. I don't think about the ways that I'm good to me. So that's a way that I'm good to me.
Well, I'm
So-
really glad you did, and I'm really glad that you discovered that and shared that with everyone, because I think that is a really crucial and possibly like the number one boundary you need to set before you can really implement other boundaries well. Because otherwise, when you do implement those boundaries, you'll be saying to yourself, you're letting everyone down, you know, and all these kind of things, you know. So thank you for sharing that, Cher. Anna,
thanks.
you're next on my screen.
Yeah, I've been sitting here thinking about what should I share. I'm gonna follow Sil. You know, you spoke about putting a boundary with hugs as a young person. That is so important. I did that for my kids. I never required them to hug anybody, even if it was grandma and grandpa, if they didn't want to, because I had to learn about boundaries in a really hard way. I started my very first boundary when I was 18, when I stood up to my father. It took a tremendous amount of strength to do that, and but once you do it, once you decide to safeguard yourself, your body, your mind, and your heart, once you take that first step, it is so empowering. You realize that there's so much more you can do when you take your power from people, because people will take it from you, especially when you're really young. If you know, there's that expression, you give an inch and people take a mile, or you give your hand and people take your arm. That's really important. If you don't have personal boundaries, and if you're like you know, Brenda and Cher talking about being people pleasers, because a lot of us grow up being that way, and we learn to be that way, and we're that way naturally. If we're naturally empathic people, we want to give, we want to serve. So yeah, that personal boundary of safeguarding your own power is really, really important.
Love that. Yeah, thank you, Anna. Yeah, really good example. And Jennifer.
Hi, I'm Jennifer from magicmindswellness.com. And my boundary, it's so funny. I listened to what you all said, and I'm like, yeah, I do that. I do that. I do that. So like, I think I set a lot of boundaries, but the one that I was thinking of to say is like, since COVID, I don't shake hands or hug people anymore. And that's a difficult thing to communicate, because most people are just back to doing everything the way it was before, and they'll treat me like I'm crazy for it. And I'm like, baby, it's nothing personal. I don't touch anybody. Like, if we're not sleeping with each other, there's no reason for us to touch. There's just no reason. So my boundary is that I just don't touch anymore since COVID. And it worked out really well, because I never caught it. So knock wood.
Yeah,
that's how I benefited from it.
And I think it's beneficial, because it has become like one of those things where hygiene's an incredibly important thing these days. And so you don't know anything about other people, and it's still about, and yeah, so really good example. And like you, I could relate to every single story here pretty much. Some of them I didn't set boundaries, like the work ones, for example. I was always taken advantage of, always doing the extra stuff, and that played out in my life. So I got two examples very quickly. One is people pleasing. So whenever anyone had a problem, I would always be like, oh, I can fix that for you, I can fix that for you, and then people would always ask me to fix their problems, and then they became this area of resentment, you know, where I'm like, oh, you know, really happy to help you, but you keep fixing things. And I actually learned that not only was it taking my energy, I was disempowering people from being able to achieve things by themselves, and, you know, actually taking on skills. And then similarly, a boundary I had set with myself that I think was related to childhood trauma of people being angry and arguing, and me always ending up in trouble when that happened. When I hear a disagreement, like in my home or around me, I always get up and try and dissolve it and resolve it. And I've had to actually say to myself, it's not your problem. If they need you, they'll come and get you. And that has really changed my life as well. And really, again, empowered them to resolve their own problems. And also with my wife and my child, I didn't realize I was taking the power away from my wife as a parent by being involved.
Bingo.
Yeah. So there's a lot of benefits to setting boundaries. So I think we really talked well about boundaries now and given some really good examples, including why boundaries are important to us, because we've all talked about the benefits of the boundaries. So how do we communicate our boundaries effectively with others without causing them hurt? Or, you know, should we worry about that hurt if they are hurt? Here's the question. Sil.
That communication is the key to it all. And part of that communication is absolutely being aware that what might be a boundary to you and important to you is not necessarily so for the other. So in order to communicate it, from my perspective, I say, get inside the thinking of the other and make them aware that your thinking, your feelings, your priorities are different to theirs. Different, not in opposition by default. Because we have to make this clear sometimes. If I say I don't want hugs, yeah, well, then I'm saying to somebody, say, well, are hugs wrong? No, I'm not saying you're wrong for wanting a hug. See, but it depends how you communicate. I'm saying I don't like hugs. I respect you wanting hugs. That's not my thing. I'm not a hugger. It's not cool. And this is now different to the thing with my mother and my sister. Because that was like really inappropriate hugging. You know, they didn't know where the boundaries of appropriate family affection lies. You know, so they wanted to go too far. But just in general with people with hugging, you know, some like to hug and others don't. But I'm making this point about mentality of opposites, really. In other words, if something's not white, it's automatically black. So if I say I don't want to hug, oh, then I'm at fault for wanting hugs. And how can you say hugs are bad? I'm not saying that. But it's no good to come at that after the fact. You have to start off with making it clear that you're the one that is just different, not in opposition, just different. And that way you can really communicate your boundaries very nicely. Plus, if you really look at what a boundary is, it's when we are in a situation where there is a repetitive transgression, a repetitive behavior that causes us a problem. It's the repetitive part that needs a boundary. You know, one time thing, yeah, I meet somebody in the street and they, all right, you know, all these people who just argue for no reason. Well, you know, I kind of have to step on them sometimes. But it's that repetitiveness that causes the problem. And also, boundaries are we are emphasizing or making clear where we have appropriate intolerance. Right? We tend to think intolerance is never appropriate, but that's not so. There are times when there is appropriate intolerance, and we have to make that clear. Yes.
Yeah, brilliant examples and brilliant points there. So, Anastasia.
First of all, I wanted to say that something that was touched on earlier, that boundaries are always set with ourselves. That's what I believe. They're not set with other people. They're communicated to other people, but the boundary is always with ourselves. Now, the best way that I have found to communicate the boundary with someone else is in the most respectful and loving way, i.e. assertively, not aggressively, not passive aggressively, but assertively, which is in the most respectful and kind way that we can think of. And that's why this is what I do and I do with others is have a little bit of role play when it's a really difficult boundary. And this is something that usually people who are people pleasing find really, really difficult. It's to have a role play or kind of a dress rehearsal, if you like, beforehand, when you've already decided a boundary for yourself, and then make up situations where you would have to communicate that boundary and then practice it. Because in the moment, it might come out as aggressive, it might come out as passive and not really communicated properly at all and go quiet. And a lot of people, especially the people pleasers, would just go, freeze up and go quiet when it's appropriate to communicate a boundary. And then do it in a way that is acceptable for ourselves. because you can't really second guess. You can't guess what somebody with the trauma response is going to do. You don't know what somebody's going to get triggered. You cannot predict everything everyone is going to think about how you communicate that boundary. As long as you have rehearsed it and it's acceptable to you, you think that this is the most kind, loving way. And of course, if somebody replies in a way that they communicate that they were hurt or upset by your boundary, obviously, if you realize that you've accidentally hurt someone's feelings, you can always apologize. You can always say, well, no, that's not how it was intended. But in order to be okay with ourselves communicating a boundary, I feel it needs to be sort of pre-thought about and thought, right, for me, this is an acceptable way to communicate this, and then you feel more confident being assertive towards others.
Yeah. Hold on. Got a bit of an echo there. Sorry about that. Right. But yeah, really true point. I think, I love the rehearsing it bit, because sometimes, especially if a boundary is really starting to frustrate us, we might definitely come across too harsh, and worse if we don't get around to setting that boundary. When we explode in front of everyone, everyone's like, I only asked for a cup of tea, or something like that.
Yeah, and that's, yes, often people who have not been expressing boundaries for a very, very, very long time, or ever, when it first comes out after a long time, it's got all this, angst and all this emotional charge to it. So it's best to have rehearsed and think, okay, this sentence is acceptable to me. If I heard it, I would have been okay. I mean, you could still get it wrong, because some people, may have had other experiences that get upset, and it's absolutely fine to to apologize if you upset someone, but still stay firm with a boundary.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. Jen Stover.
I've had the most success setting boundaries with two concepts in mind. One is timing, and the other one is delivery. Timing is important because, as you mentioned, Matt, it's like, obviously, if you've been doing something one way and then you decide I'm going to set a boundary, you're going to get a little pushback or resistance. This happened at work before, when I was in the middle of operating a certain way, and then I just, I'm changing it, and of course that puzzled people. And so now, as we enter a workspace or we onboard new people or hire, we tell them straight up, this is our work hours, this is how we take calls and emails. So the timing now is early, but so that's really important. Same with relational boundaries. We found that being really aware of your partners or your person who you're talking to's state, are they receptive? Are they open? Are they in a calm state? So timing there is critical. And the second part that was kind of already Anastasia touched on is delivery. My typical method is I always start clear and kind. And depending on the relationship, I may offer context in more information, but sometimes I don't. But I always start clear and kind. If someone pushes that and does not accept that, then I move more to firm and with resolve. And if that gets pushed, then I disengage. And I make sure that I'm clear that the person that I'm disengaging from this conversation, or I'm walking away from this setting, I'm not turning my back on you because I don't want to inadvertently trigger, somebody else's abandonment issues. But I go with clear and kind, firm with resolve, and then disengage. And I rarely have to get to that third one.
Nice. Yeah. I mean, yeah, I love it. I think sometimes people don't know where the limit is. And so you end up having to go through the three different phases that you mentioned. They're really good points there. So, John?
Yeah, well, in line with what some of the other people are saying, that, I mean, we can take the initiative. And so that when you're talking to somebody, you can even say, so is this something that makes you uncomfortable, or that you don't want to do, or that you don't agree with? In other words, what are your boundaries? So if you show respect and care for other people's boundaries, then they more or less have to, reciprocate. And so by setting the stage for acceptance of their boundaries, then it'll be come back to you. And in fact, I've found many times that changes the whole relationship. Because it opens it up and it makes it much more constructive and much more accepting. So
nice. Yeah, really, really crucial points there. Anna.
Yeah, for me, boundaries, personal boundaries are all about personal responsibility. Because, and I've only learned this in the last 5 years, that I am not responsible for other people's thoughts and feelings, only my own. And especially if you're dealing with adults, there is no reason why you can't set your boundaries firmly, compassionately. And if people don't understand, or if they get triggered, frankly, I don't think it is my responsibility to make them feel comfortable about it. With children, it's a little difficult. It's a little different. Because you want to be extra kind and compassionate with children, because they don't have yet the ability to understand complex relationships. So you have to model it for them. I've worked as a teacher for many years, and one of the roles that we have is to show children proper boundaries. And as an adult working with children, it gets really tricky because things can be misconstrued. I'm a touchy-feely kind of person. I love to hug. I love physical demonstrations of care and love. But as a teacher, I have to have very definite boundaries when it comes to physical affection. So we're allowed to like hug a child sideways, one-armed, you know, a very definite boundary. You know, I'm here for you, but you have your body and I have my body. So yeah, to communicate that to children, it's a little difficult because sometimes children are very, very needy. And you want to give that to them because maybe they don't get it at home. Maybe their parents are not very demonstrative, but it's really tricky. You have to be very careful and set very definite boundaries. Now with adults, I don't really worry too much about hurting people's feelings because they're responsible for their own feelings. I don't have to be mean about it. I can be kind and compassionate, but always firm. This is my boundary. And if it's not respected, like Jan said, you can disengage, you can walk away, you can block that person, for instance. Yeah. Self-responsibility is my thing. Yeah.
Great points there, and I think yeah, with children, they can't reason, they can't understand, and so you know we have to be very cautious as adults that we're not pushing them away or hurting or triggering their feelings. And just anyone that's watching, I mean, if there's anything you don't think we cover, feel free to comment and let us know, and we'll mention it in the show. Cher, you're next. Oh, it's not.
It always takes me just a second to undo that mute button.
No problem.
Okay, so something I've been listening with careful intensity to it, what everybody's saying, and the one thing that that strikes me is when I'm going to set a boundary, I always have to ask myself first. First off, who is it? Is it me? Is this something about me, or is this something that the other person has, I don't know, inadvertently stepped on my toes? If it's repeated, a lot of times I think that a lot of times I think we can start a boundary by cueing. One of my favorite things that I've learned from Sil is cueing. We can do our body language. Our body language, we can express a boundary that way. We don't always have to be so direct and just come right out and say, hey, you did this, or hey, you know, a lot of that can be really offensive. It can be triggering, like some other people have mentioned. But I think for me, by and large, I don't like to upset people. There's that people pleasing. So I like to try the softer approach first. And if the softer approach doesn't work, then that's when I can go in and go, all right, is this really me? Is this something I really need to address? Or is it something that I can really just learn how to tolerate? A lot of times it does come down to tolerance. Other times though, if you're in a nasty situation, work or at home in a relationship or friends, you are going to have to say something. But I like to check my intent first. That's where I like to start, is with my intent first. And then just
yeah, wow, crucial point. I think. Yeah.
There it is.
And I think that's actually such a crucial
Sorry,
point.
I got distracted.
Yeah, no.
Of boundary. You broke my boundary right there. So
but yeah, no, that was such a crucial point. I think like when you have good intentions of setting boundaries, boundaries are set very easily. When you have selfish intentions, when you set a boundary, or the wrong intentions, then suddenly you get this conflict. So it is quite very, very true. Jennifer Burns, you're next.
Thank you, Matt. So I really like Jen Stover's method of like the 3 steps, and I kind of do something similar. Like I'll start off very nice. If that doesn't work, I know that no matter what happened after that, I started off really nice. So I already feel absolved of my guilt. Then a brief explanation if necessary, and then disengaging. However, I wanted to point out a couple things that are important. Like if it's something that is a business related boundary, you know, I was always famous for putting signs up. If it was something that was applicable to all my clients, because the thing about putting a sign up is that no one takes it personally. It doesn't say dear so-and-so, it's like attention all clients. So that's, I think when people end up in an argument over boundary setting, it's because the person that the boundary was being set for took it to heart, took it personal. But if they know that that rule is applicable to everybody, then there's nothing to get upset about. There's nothing to take personally. Also, the language being used when you set your boundaries, I statements instead of you statements sound less accusatory and things of that nature. Also, replacing the word but with end was something I was taught a very long time ago that works really well. Because when people hear the word but, the brain connects that to disagreement, but the word end is different. So you could say, I understand that you feel this way and I feel a little bit different, and that's okay. And you just, it doesn't sound like anything that anyone should be offended by. And if they are, that's not my problem. So that's how I like to do it. I like to use, the most polite language possible, start off with the most kind approach possible. And once my boundary has been established, if it's crossed after that, then disengage for sure. But signs work really well. Notices on your website, stuff like that.
Signs, yeah.
Yeah, signs.
Yeah, I can see how they would definitely work in the work environment.
Yeah,
sure.
it's not personal.
No, for sure. And I think like one of the things that just came to mind for me when setting boundaries is not over explaining. Being quite assertive and really just getting to the point and just saying like, being clear and not over explaining, because then you're justifying your actions and everything. Anthony, you're next on my screen.
Yeah, really good feedback on everyone so far. I wanted to add that there's, I wanted to add a couple of concepts. Number one, there are ways of saying no. There are frameworks out there that take it from, instead of being like just no, there are ways to artfully say no. And one quick example, one that I like to use a lot, if someone asks me to do something which is a no, but it's also a heartbreaking no, I usually say something like, yes, no, yes. So yes, I love that idea, or thank you for like asking me for that. Right now, my priority is this, so no, but yes, I would suggest something, something else, or, another thing that would maybe partially meet their needs. But that's just one example. Is kind of the sandwiched no between two yeses. And it's a way of like artfully being able to express a boundary. And those things are really useful, not only in general, but also for flow specifically and being able to manage expectations and getting work done. The other thing that I wanted to mention is just the concept and the existence of nonviolent communication. Also, this is a thing that people can train in or people can check out. There are things on YouTube about it. There's an institution that certifies people to train in nonviolent communication. And my point is, there's a lot of concepts from nonviolent communication that are very useful in terms of asserting, expressing boundaries and getting, both needs met in healthy ways. So yeah, that's my little share.
Yeah, I think really good share there. And I think even though it may not be clear, like I was saying earlier, when you don't set boundaries, you can get to the point that you're that frustrated that it can become a heated conversation or an aggressive conversation. Still, you're next on my screen.
How we communicate our boundaries is absolutely critical, as we've already established that communication. But what's even more critical is your internal relationship and perspective and feelings and appreciation of your own boundary. It's your boundary. This is really critical. So when you're trying to communicate a boundary, if you're awkward or uncomfortable, that's really going to impact how somebody receives the communication about your boundary. Even worse, if you are apologetic or defensive, now you're really going to have a hard time. In other words, if you're not fully at ease with your boundary, you're going to have a tough time communicating this to somebody else. But when you are fully comfortable, somebody sticks out their hand and you say, I don't shake hands. And you can smile. It's like, well, it's no big deal. It's just like you might as well be saying the sky is blue, right? Oh, I don't shake hands. Okay. Well, it's just my thing. All right. That's implied in your attitude to communication. So if you want to go a little bit further, you can then say, it's just my idiosyncrasy. Okay, now in COVID times, this is now a bit more understandable. I'm thinking of pre-COVID times, right? When that was very unusual. Then you can give a rationale if you want to, but the bottom line is you don't have to say I'm a germaphobe or whatever, because maybe that's not the reason. Some people just don't like shaking hands. But if you take that into consideration, that even by implication, if you can share some rationale, some justification, that basically comes down to the fundamental point that sometimes my boundaries it's my idiosyncrasy. Now, that may or may not be the whole picture, all right? I'm talking about, say, boundaries where people are being offensive or whatever. But in general, this enables others to say, oh, it's you, not me. Like when I was in the military, I'd stopped drinking at that time. Never, I just didn't like drinking. It just didn't work for me. It made me physically ill. So this was very hard to communicate. And it was so people offer you a drink and you say, no, thanks. Because it's a very deeply drinking culture that I was in. They automatically take this as a criticism. So I had to provide that rationale to say, look, it just doesn't work for my body. I don't know, maybe I'm lucky. It makes it a lot cheaper in the long run. Make some joke about it. But this really made all the difference, because if I had not provided that rationalization, that justification, and that being my idiosyncrasy, I would have gotten very, very negative feedback. Because I've seen this with others. And those that do drink, they really take it as a personal affront, a personal criticism of them when you don't drink. So it's very necessary to be aware that your communication of your boundary isn't just a matter of cueing, as Shir said. Cueing, in other words, what you prompt automatically in others by your attitude. Like if I'm apologetic, I'm already cueing there's a problem with this boundary and I'm going to get pushback. But if I'm at ease and say, well, it's no big deal, I'm cueing that it's not a big deal. And then if I go the extra mile to provide that justification or rationalization, at least not by way of explaining it necessarily, but just personally to say, well, it's just my thing, then people are very accepting of your boundaries when it is a personal particular issue.
Yeah, I love that, Sil. And so, quick, John, you're next, yeah?
Okay, yeah. Just to say that I think that when we have when we really understand, when we really communicate well with ourselves, then we can have an authenticity, and that comes across very clearly. If it's clear to the other people that this is really just you're not trying to prove anything, It's not aggressive. It's just the way that it is. It's kind of a tiny force of nature. Because we have worked it out within ourselves and why, then I think other people will respect that and respond to it.
Yeah, really, really good point there, John. Thank you. And Brenda.
Hi, just a small thing. Several people were talking about hugging. I couldn't hug before. I was very like, just don't even, just get off me. And I did some shaman healing. So now I can hug properly. And then what happens a few years later, COVID comes along and we're not hugging. And so New Year's Eve, I went out to a party and I was having concerns, maybe I shouldn't go, but then I went and everybody was hugging, and didn't I catch the flu and COVID? So I'm back to, I'm going to take all of the advice here of how to say it very firmly and nicely. I just not hugging right now. So all the love to you, fake hug, like not fake hug, but I used to say fake hug, but it's just like, distance hugging. So I could express that I care about the person, but I'm not taking the chance to get that to COVID or any other. I was so happy when I had my mask on and I was away from people. I was 3 years. I'm like 3 years, no cold, no flu, no nothing. And then boom. So very important boundaries. Sometimes it's just small little things, but when it's something like you get sick for a very long time and it's just not worth it. So I like all of the I wrote down everything everybody said. I'm just like amazed at all the ideas that everybody came up with today. Brilliant. Everybody here is very good at everything they're doing. So thank you for sharing, because I am new to boundaries. So
yeah, I'm fairly new myself, and I've been really taken back by how great the examples have been today. Anna, you're next.
Yeah, I'm loving all of your experiences. This is really wonderful. So like Brenda, boundaries is a new thing for me. What I've come to understand for myself, and I did a painting about boundaries specifically, is that for me now, boundaries can be symbolized by a really beautiful door that you have that you can either open or close depending on the situation. And why open or close? Because boundaries are also about knowing when to give and when to receive. And if your boundaries are too rigid, that might be an indication that you don't know how to receive kindness and help from other people. And I've had to learn that because of my history. My first learning was to set up boundaries to keep people away so they wouldn't infringe on my boundaries. They wouldn't infringe, they wouldn't step over my boundaries, because I didn't have any. I didn't know how to have boundaries. And once I did that, then I started realizing that my boundaries were like a fortress, and I needed to understand how to let people in too. How to be vulnerable with people. So you have to understand about vulnerability when you are setting your boundaries. Because boundaries are not just to keep people away, they're also about knowing how to let people in when it's appropriate.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point there. Is sometimes like we have boundaries that are actually blocking us from making a connection. So boundaries, not just setting them to actually create freedom, identifying and releasing them so that we can also create freedom and receive. I'm definitely not a good receiver. I'm a much better giver. Yes, Sandy, you're next.
Just when I take a sip of tea. It's okay. Yeah. And the second question, I had to walk out for a bit. So
the second question was
how do we communicate boundaries effectively to others? and it also ties into what Anna just said, not knowing your boundaries, or is for me, when I use the example that I shared in the beginning, for me, it was really uncomfortable, but it felt like I have to put this boundary here for myself. So I could also communicate it quite calmly, like, this is something I do not agree with, without any judgment, without any labeling on how I worded it. I just said, I do not agree with what's here on paper. And that even, I work with Matt, and I can say to Matt, like, hey, you have a contract here, but I do not agree what's here on paper. You wouldn't get this. But the person that I was talking with, but really was all over the place emotionally. So you cannot take responsibility for the emotions of the other, which was also already shared. But when I started to work on seeing my boundaries, what I would allow or would not allow, it also gave me more perspective on my own personality and who I am and how I want to communicate to the world, or what I do not want to be thrown on my plate, so to say. Because it's like you discover, hey, this is what I do allow. Oh, I have a boundary here, but what am I not allowing myself to receive or have or do by placing that boundary there for myself? So it's not only boundaries towards others, it's also boundaries you place towards yourself.
Yeah, definitely. Absolutely. And Sil, did you want to add something? And then I'm going to get into some comments.
Well, that's exactly what I want to comment on, is the comments.
So great minds think alike, hey, Sil?
Yes, and fools seldom differ, of course. Right?
Yeah, very so. Yeah, very soon. So yeah. Just digesting that. Yeah, fools seldom differ.
There was a comment where the question was asked, why are boundaries important? And it's like, it's like kind of a direct question, but there is a very fundamental reason for me why boundaries are critically important. Because to me, a boundary is the line where my ethics define my integrity. So if I take my integrity, what defines my integrity, the line around it, that is my ethical boundary where I will not cross. If I cross that boundary, I compromise my ethics, and we have that compromise of that personal self-integrity, like the hull integrity of a ship, and we start to get leaky, and we get all those problems with leakiness. So this is an absolute critical issue. And when I have that clear boundary of my conscience, that line I absolutely will not cross no matter what, then I start to develop that independence of being. Now, when it comes to my boundaries and I have that independence of being, there is also another issue, which says that I am insisting on my wants, my likes. However, the key issue is that my wants and my likes are not randomly come by. They're not just me saying whatever I like. No, they're very thoughtful. And I'm never going to insist on a boundary which violates somebody else, right? I mean, like, for instance, me insisting on hugging when other people don't want to hug. That's me wanting my want, but it's disregarding others. So when we set our boundaries, we have to be sure that we aren't doing something that is inappropriate, that we cannot justify, right? In other words, if you're having purely self-centered wants and likes, that you're trying to set your boundary, well, I have to be hugged. And I know people who insist on always being hugged, right? And this is a big problem because they don't take me into consideration. Their boundaries are purely one-sided. So we have to really think through what it is that we insist on, that we can have our conscience be at ease and can sign off on this and say, yes, I'm okay. This does not violate my integrity, and it doesn't violate somebody else either. However, If I say, it's my thing, I don't want to be hugged. If you don't like it, well, too bad. And when I really cue that in a situation where somebody is a hugger, well, I just say, okay, it's their thing, it's not their thing, and they sort of leave it, because I'm not being defensive or apologetic about it or insistent in an artificial way. This is very key when it comes to boundaries, to have that that independence of being, and to make sure that your conscience is at ease both ways, not just from your own boundary, but also taking others' boundaries into account.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think integrity, we've mentioned authenticity and now integrity. They're two crucial things that boundaries allow for, definitely. Don, you wanted to add something before I got into the comments.
So, yeah, I thought I might share, like, how it's gone down for me in some instances. And yeah, I think it's appropriate to, like, the sort of the length of the relationship and the interaction that's been going on. And so I think if it's been quite long, then how I've gone about it is I kind of like dissect the whole situation with a bunch of questions, so many questions, so that I know exactly what this person is why this person is talking like this, how they're thinking, why they're thinking like this, why they're responding to me like this. And then if I am completely clear, like they're out of their mind, I will let them have it. And yeah, I think sometimes a natural response is appropriate. I'm not warranting that for, as a solution to all circumstances, but for some people in some circumstances, it can help.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, and I think it's a very honest point there. Sandra, I'm quickly going to run through some comments here, because we've got quite a few and I haven't had a chance to read them out yet, and then I will get straight back to you. But Rita said that she follows her intuition, and she definitely says other people's feelings are not her responsibility. And then Ramsey has said that he's learned not having proper boundaries before was due to issues he had, like trauma, bonding, attachment issues, and that all of my suffering had led to because of others, and because he was allowing it to continue. So by not setting boundaries. And then this is leading on to my next question. That's why I was getting into the comments. So Norma's commented, aren't boundaries unloving? We're discussing verbal and biological boundaries. She's confused. And so, Sandy, you can definitely answer, but just to let you know, the next question is going to be, what are some common misconceptions about boundaries? And how can we overcome them to establish healthy boundaries? So we've covered this a little bit, but I think, are boundaries unloving? Is that a misconception? So that's why I'm leading on with that question. Sandra, do you want to add what you want to say, and then if you've got anything to add to this?
First wanted to also add to what Sil just said about hugging. And I did my body work training 3 years in a group. Body workers are huggers, period. But I always ask permission if somebody wants to hug, because I might want to hug, but that other person might have boundaries surrounding that hugging. So it's always asking permission. It's the same. If I work with someone on a table, and if I always ask permission if I'm allowed to touch somebody to do body work, even though I'm a body worker, because that also has to do with making sure I do not cross any boundaries or the client on the table is. So, and that also ties in with the next question about aren't boundaries not loving? Yes, they are, because by respecting your own boundaries and respecting someone else's boundaries, you respect yourself and the other person. And that's really important. If you do not have any boundaries and you keep crossing someone else's boundaries all of the time, or many people's boundaries all of the time, then you really get a messy world.
Yes.
Because if you look at certain politicians, what they shout or say or do, they're constantly crossing boundaries, and see what's happening. It's turning our society to something that we don't want.
Yeah.
And that's also because there's a lot of people that agree with what's happening, but it's bound. There's no boundaries there. Well, if you respect your own boundaries and can say, I do not agree, or I do not consent to what's happening with me or with others around me, you do that from a place of love or loving, or
Brilliant. Yeah, it's such a crucial point. And I think that's the first time we've mentioned politics on the show. I'm not sure. But Anna, you're next. Yeah, sorry. Yeah, I'm only joking.
Yeah, great stuff. Thank you, Sander, for bringing that up. Yes, I want to get back to the aspect of vulnerability in setting boundaries. That it is a loving process. And for me, I always give people the benefit of the doubt. And I ask a lot of questions, and I want to understand where is this coming from? Where is there a need here, or is there an offering? And a good example is what, since my profile went public, I get a lot of unsolicited friend requests. Some of them are from people who just want me to buy their business. And a lot of them lately is from men who just, for some reason, they find me interesting, and they contact me asking for friendship when I don't know them from Adam. And it's like, okay, what's going on here? So what I do is I give people the benefit of the doubt, and I ask questions, because it is a privilege to enter my world, to enter my space. So I want to make sure that people are entering it. It comes back to that door. It's a door that I open or close depending on the situation. And I do it always lovingly, giving people the benefit of the doubt. So I ask questions. Who are you? How, where do you, what do you do? What's your thing? Why is it that you're interested in me? What is your intention in wanting to friend? And if a person comes from the same place, from a vulnerable, kind, compassionate, well-intentioned place, then I accept their friendship. Otherwise, no, this is my castle. This is my kingdom. And it is a privilege to enter it, as it is also my responsibility to figure out who belongs in this, in my beautiful castle. Yeah, vulnerability, I think, is a really good ingredient in anything that we do, because vulnerability implies self-responsibility, self-honesty, and authenticity. Boundaries, when boundaries are set from that place, they're always very loving, from my perspective, my opinion.
Yeah, it's brilliant. I love it. And I think it's a really good example of how you have to set boundaries. And ultimately, if you had too strong boundaries at that point, you may never make more connections and more friends through Facebook, because you'd just be banning and blocking all these people straight away. Sil, you're next.
Boundaries are loving. They're intensely so. Because to me, a boundary is about mutual respect. Not just me asking you to respect me. No, that's my point earlier. that when I set a boundary, I can't set a boundary that infringes upon you. No, that's not cool either. So it's mutual respect. And also, it's very important, I feel, to be really clear as to what is a boundary. A boundary is not a border or a fence or a wall. Those are very different things, right? So if you think of the neighboring line between yourself and your neighbor and your house, your yard, right? You may have a fence there, but let's assume you don't. It's open. It's just a boundary line. That is a boundary line which is not exclusionary. You, as my neighbor, if we're on good terms, you cross that line all the time and I cross it into yours. However, there's an understanding that when you cross my boundary line, you now fall within my scope of how things work. When I go onto your yard, your property, and then I follow what your likes are and I follow your preferences and I give them preference. And also, there's some things that I can do as a friend, as a neighbor. I can come and say hello and hi anytime if you've got a really good relationship. But I can't be planting a tree in your property. See? So there's unspoken understandings when we have a boundary. That it's not hard and fast. It's not a wall. It's not a fence. It's not a boundary. It's a border. I mean, it's not there to keep you out. No, a boundary simply delineates where it becomes my rules versus your rules. Really, that's the bottom line. And okay, rules is a harsh word, but where it's your preferences, my preferences. I respect you, you respect me. And when we are in each other's space, maybe we may have a mutual space. We meet outside of our individual properties. Now we have a different set of preferences that are engaged. And the deep underlying point is that when we truly have some understandings about our boundaries, it's a clear understanding. I'm respecting you, and I'm not only acknowledging your difference. I'm going even further. I'm not even only accepting your difference. I'm going all the way into celebrating your difference. This to me is ultimate boundary, ultimate neighborliness, ultimate love, where I celebrate your difference. This is profound. This to me, very, very profound. It's very useful to be clear as to exactly what we mean by a boundary.
Yeah, really love that. And I think it's really crucial. I was thinking about the boundaries around the houses earlier, and I love the way you brought that in there. Jennifer.
I agree that that it is loving to set a boundary, because it isn't just loving to yourself. It's loving to the other person. You're letting them know honestly what they can expect from you in the future. You're giving them fair warning, and you are creating a way to figure out if there is a true compatibility between two people or not. Because if you just people please and you don't lay your boundary down out of concern for offending the other person, you lead them to believe that things are okay that aren't okay with you. And then whatever happens, that's on you at that point. But I'm a big fan of the expression, we teach people how to treat us. We teach them how to treat us. And there's nothing wrong with doing that. I think that there's a lot of authenticity involved with that. There's a lot of honesty. And if a person thinks that it's not loving, like I'm going to use the example of the hugging thing. I know we've talked it to death, but it's like a big thing. And some people still back me up on this. People that don't understand it really get hurt sometimes. They think that you think something bad about them, but to understand that's an issue that's going on inside their mind. It has nothing to do with what you did. And I always like to offer the consolation prize right away to know that they are loved. I'll say, if they go in for a hug, I'll be like, I don't do that. I do this one now, but I really like you. You're getting two, I'll do something like that so that they understand, I have love for you. I'm not disrespecting you. I appreciate you. And this is as far as I'm comfortable going to touch. Or I do air kisses, like mwah, mwah in the air, just so that they know I'm not rejecting you. But if I didn't do that, and my boundary was crossed, I would have myself to blame for that. That wouldn't be the other person's fault anymore. You lose the right to complain about it when you don't state what that boundary is right from the beginning, and ultimately we end up upset with ourselves, and I like the example that Sil gave about the property lines, and if you go outside of the property lines, there are different rules that are applicable. So it's like when in Rome, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The
really,
rules in certain places.
For sure. And I think a really great example as well there, Jennifer. Right, Don.
So yeah, we're talking about the question of respect, and if somebody is like getting into our space, and maybe they've been doing it repeatedly for a long period of time, then you can say that there's been a breakdown of respect in that sort of situation. And if we're talking about an appropriate response to reestablish respect in there, then it depends on how that respect fell away. I mean, maybe it was because of timidity, maybe it's because of lack of conscious thought, maybe because they were too emotional. It could be anywhere on the spectrum as to why the respect broke down. And at the point at which it could be returned, the opposite needs to be shown.
Yeah, definitely. Oh, you are still there.
Yeah,
Sorry, you
that's
disappeared. Yeah, sorry, you moved on my screen when I went and I couldn't see you. Brilliant. Thanks for sharing that, Don. That was really crucial. Anna, sorry.
Thanks, Matt. I wanted to, listening to Sil, it triggered a thought about the difference between rules and agreements and how that relates to boundaries. For me, I'd rather have less rules and better agreements, because rules are set in stone and they're not flexible. Agreements are flexible, they can be negotiated. And that's how boundaries look like for me now, is I'm making an agreement with this person that this is a place where I want to create a boundary because I don't know you yet, or I don't know you well enough. I want to know more. So let's get to know each other. But at this point, this is how far I want to go, and this is how far I want you to go, until we get to know each other. This is really important for parents to understand that boundaries have to be flexible. So as you're raising a child, you have like these little fences around them that are meant to protect them and to teach them how far they can go. So for instance, very good example with a toddler. Toddlers are notorious for pushing boundaries, but needing boundaries at the same time. So they will walk away from you up to a distance as far as they're able or ready to go. And then they come back right for you to touch base, to say, am I okay? Can I go further? And that's how you raise children. You raise them with flexible boundaries so that they understand and they learn whether they're ready to go further or not. And that's how I deal with people, especially people that I'm serving. I create flexible boundaries for them because they don't know yet how far they can go. When we work with people in self-development, it's really important to know that what you are guiding them in is uncharted territory for them. So you want to help them understand those flexible boundaries, those agreements, so that they can take confident steps further and further and pushing the boundary more and more with care and with self-understanding. I hope I made sense.
Yeah, you did. Really good points. Yeah, thank you, Anna. Sil.
Yes, definitely. Rules. That's why I wasn't really so comfortable with rules. Agreements. Absolutely, it's crucial to boundaries and also preferences. And this is a mutual issue that we are agreeing on. However, there are times when you kind of do lay down the rules, right? Where to be extreme, to say, well, hey, you come and on my property, I don't litter. Okay, on your property, you do. All right, if you're going to litter on my property and it's a thoughtless act, all right, I can still accept this. It's all right, I'll live with it. It's not the end of the world. But if you're going to go around spitting on my carpet or even worse than that, I'm gonna give examples. Now, this is a different deal. Now I'm gonna have to say, hey, dude, here in my house, we don't put on the carpet. Now, I mean, I've been in situations where there have been these gross differences between, cultural differences, which are, for some people, aren't acceptable, but for others are. So at some point, you have to say, no, this is a rule, it's no longer just an agreement, right? And then, of course, these are my preferences, which is a different thing entirely. But I want to bring up a really, really fundamental point, which I had and it came and I just went again, in terms of our boundaries. When it comes to respect, I'll bring it up again. Dang, it went and it came and it went again. So sorry.
It will be back. It will be back, I'm sure. Sander, you're next.
Yeah, beautifully said, Sil, that and also Anna, that it's agreements, it's not rules. And Anna, what Anna said was also beautiful, because when we help people discover the things about themselves that are uncharted territory, they have to cross one of or more multiple of their own boundaries. Because the parts that we denied ourselves, we go back several sessions, those are the parts that are put in a boundary by us, or put away by us. So it's, so to know what boundaries are, and sometimes you have to cross your own boundaries to get to parts of yourself, and it's not even somebody else who is crossing the boundary, but you crossing your own boundaries to discover more about yourself. And I think I reminded Sil of what he wanted to share.
Sil?
Yeah, sorry to jump the queue, but it's a big point. When we understand why people struggle with boundaries, I feel it goes back towards the myth. Not well, I'm calling it a myth or fallacy of the golden rule. What was the golden rule we were taught as children? You probably all can recite it. Do unto others as you would have them do unto you. Well, to me, that's a narcissist rule. Yeah, and this really grabbed me when it comes to Jennifer hugging, right? I heard that and I changed the rule because of this. I said, no, this is nonsense. You're doing to me what you want unto you. You want to be hugged. Are you coming and hugging me? I don't care for hugs. Why? Because I feel too much when I hug you. I'm feeling all of your insecurities, your nervousness, your desperation, whatever, right? Sorry, thank you very much. I can do without that. But the problem is the person wanting to hug me, they're not being inconsiderate. They believe I want it because they want it. They're buying into this myth of doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. No, it doesn't actually work. People are different. They're not the same. That rule, if it's not a narcissist rule, is also a rule which presupposes we have these similarities. And well, it's like, duh, people want to be hugged. You assume if you're a hugger, you're not respecting the fact that I am different to you. So the golden rule, when you throw it out, and for me, my golden rule is do unto others as they would have you do unto them, as appropriate, because I'm not going to do unto a narcissist what they want them to do, right? I'm not going to go around worshiping you. Sorry. So it's do unto others as appropriate that they want to do. Now we start to have this where we are truly acknowledging, respecting, and being appropriate when it comes to boundaries. Very big point. Very big point.
Thank you, Sil. Yeah, awesome. Okay.
Thank you for jumping in the queue there. Sorry.
That's okay, Sil. Yeah, no problem at all. And Brenda, you're next.
Hi, yeah, mine was sort of more a question and a concern that I'm having trouble setting boundaries in an old relationship where I get a lot of pushback saying, well, you were okay with that before and you never complained about this before. I know, so I'm not allowed to do this. And it's all, you don't want me to do that. And it's exactly what Sil just said. This is a narcissist that I've had to have a relationship with in a family. And I say something and they just keep hounding, pushing back. And I thought maybe someone there, I don't want to sidetrack all the questions, but maybe someone there had a quick response. That's probably a huge a huge response required, but a quick response of how do you stay strong and say, you know, it's not about you. But I'm very, been a very passive aggressive in things. And I just sort of, and I don't want to do that. I want to do this assertive thing. So it's like when I say something, they're like, well, you were okay with that before. And so I just thought maybe one or two little quick comments without sidetracking it. How do you mitigate setting a boundary with a narcissist, and how do you get that confidence? So I just thought a couple people might know. Anyway, I don't want to jump the question in case it was coming up next.
I'm not sure if Sila's answering you or talking to somebody else because his microphone's on mute, but his lips are moving. I mean, I was going to say, I've been in this situation where I spent years of not having a boundary and realized I need to implement a boundary because I'm causing myself pain. And yeah, it takes just really like calm and repetitiveness and standing your ground, really. I mean, you know, you've got to stand your ground, but without getting too fed up, from my opinion, and just keep reminding them that, you know, you can't do this anymore, or this is why it's not right for you, or, you know, and also you're going to empower them as well with this. Anna, do you have anything to add?
Yes, I wanted to bring up the concept of patterns versus boundaries. So like I'm sorry, now I'm blanking. Brenda was bringing up this idea that sometimes we cross a boundary with somebody that we thought wasn't there before, or it wasn't there before, and now they've changed and they've created a boundary, and you need to learn this boundary again. And a lot of times this comes from behavioral patterns that we have that we need to break in ourselves. And that a lot of times that leads to us understanding that if somebody is setting a boundary with us, is because they're trying to break a pattern that you are displaying that is unhealthy. And you want to be open to it because usually it comes from a loving place. And case in point, I really appreciate my relationship with Matt. We've known each other now for what, 2-3 years? And you have developed really beautiful boundaries and how you communicate them. And you do that with me. And I always learn something when you set boundaries with me. Before, I wasn't able to do that. I would take it personally. What do you mean? You know, I don't have to change myself for you, kind of thing. But yeah, so there's an element of self-reflection when you are negotiating boundaries with people, because sometimes you don't realize that you are only following an unhealthy behavioral pattern that you've learned, and you need to break it.
Brilliant. That's really useful, Anna. And yeah, I mean, for me, setting boundaries with clients is a new thing as well. I used to, like I said, it was one of my areas. So I try and be what I try and do is just be as honest as possible, because my intentions aren't bad. You know, that's the thing, is I just try and say what I need to say or feel needs to be said, because my intentions are good and they're for both of us, so that we have the best working relationship. And Brenda, just to let you know anyway, and just to continue the conversation, actually did lead on to my next question now, which was going to be, what are some practical tips and strategies for identifying and enforcing our boundaries, and how can we make them a regular part of, and enforcing our boundaries? And that's it. I don't need to go any further than that today. So I'll just share that with you in the questions. And then Jennifer, would you like to go next?
Yes, I wanted to respond to what Brenda had brought up about how to address a narcissist when they say to you, well, you've always been okay with it. If it were me, what I would do in that situation is say, Yes. And you know what? I did say I was okay with it. And I actually want to take this opportunity to apologize to you because I was never okay with it. And I just wasn't comfortable telling you that. But I figure the best thing to do is be honest and give you an opportunity to show me how respectful you actually are. Because now if they go against that, now they just disrespected you. So there's nothing, that's it.
Wow. Yeah. So short and sweet. One of the quickest and easiest responses. And I think very, 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 very crucial and useful for Brenda. Sil.
All right, I'll take your cue there. So first of all, I just want to say on narcissists, I define them a little deeper. And I call them, BMNs, for bullshit manipulator narcissists, because it all goes together. And when it comes to boundaries with them, look up Event Horizon. That's all I'll say.
Okay. Event Horizon. All right. And so we like a bit of mystery on the show.
All right, I'll elaborate. You force my hand. You force my hand. So an Event Horizon is the line when you come to a black hole. And when you look at BMNs, they have black hole psychology, right? That's how they operate. You cannot do anything to fix a black hole. Any energy you give a black hole makes it worse. Therefore, when it comes to a black hole, know where the event horizon is. An event horizon is defined as that line once you cross it, that the pull of the black hole is greater and stronger than the force of your energies or engines to get you out of the pool, right? So if you cross that event horizon, you're completely done for, in other words. That's how it is with BMNs. In other words, you've got to know with BMNs, it's not the boundaries. For them, you have to put up that wall, that barrier. And there's a line that you can't go beyond because they will just keep taking. So you've got to essentially disengage and not associate. Don't go across that boundary line because there's no fixing a black hole. Any energy you give them is used the wrong way, right? Can't be done. You can only starve them, right? So the rules, all of what we said about boundaries, at least what I said instead, everything changes when you start to deal with BMNs. Everything changes. Nothing is the same, right? Nothing.
Brilliant. Thank you. Sander?
Yeah. Wrong button. Now I lost my train of thought. Yeah. Also with boundaries, if you're setting them for the first time, or you feel that something is a boundary for you in this moment and previously wasn't there, is to stay true to what you're feeling regarding the boundary that you are setting, and setting over and over again. Maybe it also is a process of getting used to. It's building a habit that something for you at that point becomes a boundary. And while previously you might have crossed the boundary and you might not have had awareness of the boundary, or you just went along with the group or what others thought you should be feeling or should be accepting, is stay true to your own feelings when it comes to your own boundaries. That's really important.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter what anybody else thinks about your boundary, as long as the boundary is not crossing anybody else's boundaries. If you stay true to them, it's all about what's good for you, and not so much what somebody else wants to get from you.
Yeah. Crucial point. Love that. Thank you, Sander. Anna. Put you drawing there, I think, or making notes.
Yeah. So to address the issue of narcissists, narcissists, and we all display narcissistic behaviors at some point in our life. So it doesn't have to be a horrible thing. It's just sometimes a phase that we go through because we have to resolve certain traumas in our lives, certain needs that weren't met. But to me, the way I see narcissists is they're expert groomers, meaning they will build you up in the beginning, make you feel really seen and heard and just so special, until they get you to a point where they can take what they need from you. They're also energy suckers. So once they get you at that point that you're like, oh, this person really, really sees me, they start tearing you down little by little. They start gaslighting you, just pointing out every little defect you have. I've dealt with narcissists before, and it's really, really easy to fall prey to narcissists. They're very charismatic people. But a good thing to look for is if you feel like your energy is being depleted, sucked out of you, usually that's because that person is a narcissist. And so that's a real big red flag, and you need to then set really good boundaries for yourself. The other thing I wanted to address is what was brought up about the golden rule. I also believed in the golden rule: do unto others as you want to be done unto you. That's BS, because you have no idea how people want to be treated. You have to wait and see. They will show you how they want to be treated. It is more important for you to establish how you want to be treated. Take care of yourself first, and then investigate. Be curious about the other person. They will show you how they want to be treated. Sometimes they ask you to treat them in a way that is unacceptable for you. So that is not a friendship. That's not a relationship you want in your life. You know, like narcissists. Yeah, so the golden rule it needs to be redefined, in my opinion.
Yeah, that's funny actually, because Sil's mentioned it, and then there's also a famous person that we're connected to whose name I'm not going to drop right now, that calls it the platinum rule, which is the same as what Sil's talking about here. And yeah, so Sil, would you like to comment? Right.
Yeah, in this, when we're looking to respect others, the key is, like Sandra was saying, just following on what you were saying, in this, that I'm insisting on my rule, and also what Anna's saying, but not at your expense. This is the key. So the key issue is my conscience at ease? I cannot do anything that's unconscionable. This is not possible. However, I want to really illustrate, and you know, we use narcissism so broadly, but that's Anna why I like to add in that bullshit and the manipulator part, because you get some narcissists that are in their own bubble and they just loving themselves, but they aren't necessarily manipulative, and they don't necessarily go out deliberately bullshitting you, right? So I really make that distinction a little bit with those, I call them BMNs, that are really out to manipulate you and abuse you, and they all into the superiority paradigm. That's their whole game, is about dominance, being better than, and all that nonsense. We can get, it's too long to go into the whole psychology of that. But to understand, though, that they are intent on manipulation. So they throw out all boundaries completely and utterly, and we have to have a completely different mindset. But also to touch on the other point that you said from a golden rule point of view, that when I think I know what somebody else wants, am I not being arrogant and presumptuous? I refuse to do that. So yes, I will try and do what you want, but I'm going to make a big effort to actually find out what that is and not just assume. And this goes to helping. I see many people cause many deep problems because they want to help others, and inadvertently they completely just violate all boundaries because they assume they know what is help for somebody else, right? They never bother to ask, yeah? And we've probably all been at the receiving end of well-meaning people. Oh, but it's good for you, you know? No, thank you very much. You might think so, but I don't. So it's very important to actually really make an effort to find out what people want.
Really, I love that. And I think, personally, I think that's a really good end to the show. I think that's a really good place to leave it. And does anybody else want to add anything before I go? Is there any more questions from the guests? From the audience? Sorry, no, brilliant. That was crucial, the amazing point there, Sil.
All good. Thank you.
So just to conclude on the show, so we talked today about boundaries. What an amazing show. So many interesting different boundaries that were set by each of us. And so boundaries are really necessary. We can have too many or too few boundaries. Boundaries are about knowing about when to give and when to receive. We must respect the boundaries of others if we wish them to respect ours. Relationships, work, self-love, unhelpful mental or physical habits are all places we need to have boundaries. Boundaries are set with ourselves, but need to be communicated with others. When communicating boundaries, it's important to demonstrate it's for you and not because there is a problem with the other person. It's often the intention behind the boundary that makes it easier to communicate and implement. Boundaries are empowering, both to you and the other person. We must be assertive and sometimes a little forceful when setting boundaries. A good suggestion is try rehearsing the boundary before you actually go and tell it to somebody else, and definitely get those boundaries in place before you explode. Timing is important and calm, and being kind and firm with resolve will be the best way to get them across. So boundaries create clarity around your preferences and what's okay for us. They're agreements that benefit you and everyone else. They are mutual agreements. They create freedom. They create the potential for cooperation. And they are two crucial elements of living your best life. We should all have clear boundaries. It would make the world a better place. Stay true to your own feelings when setting your boundaries. So thank you all for coming today. We're going to be back next week talking about authenticity. So that's going to be a very interesting show. And if you want following me on my profile, you can join me with Anthony, who was here earlier today, and we're going to be talking about efficiency, effectiveness, flow, and festivals on Monday. So what an interesting conversation that is going to be. So thank you to everyone here today. And thank you to the audience.
Pleasure.
Okay.
And you made me think in your summation that, you know, if our personal boundaries can easily become prison walls, so something to pay attention to, way too narrow.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, personal boundaries can definitely either way. Yeah, for sure. Thank you for everybody who tuned in today. It's been a great show, and thank you for everyone that was here.